Welcome to the Consumer Code Show, where we believe that humans are incredible and we are living in the first era in history where behavioral data and AI have hit scale so we can go from consumer insight to business activation in no time. In this show, we explore the world of retail through the lens of demography, cartography, ethnography, and the economy. So without further ado, let's get into this episode. Okay, welcome to Consumer Code. Today we have Ryan Redus, who is the Vice President of Real Estate at Hopdoddy. Ryan, welcome to the show.
Hey, Lyden, what's up? Good morning.
Good morning. Well, hey, one of the reasons I wanted to have you on is we talked years ago and you were at Buxton and you've moved to a few other places, but you landed on the client side. And I'm really curious, one, about Hopdoddy, but also about what your experience has been going from the consulting and analytics side into the client side. What was important back then? What is actually really important now? So I kind of want to detail some of that out. But let's start with this. So people, you do have a really unique background. Just before when we were recording, you and I were talking about programmatic advertising. I don't talk about programmatic advertising with folks that are in real estate. So give us a little sense of your background so we know where you're coming from.
Yeah, so great to finally do this. We've been chatting about doing this for a while, so it's good to see you. Yeah, so I'm really a restaurant guy through and through. My parents started a restaurant company when I was a little kid, and so growing up in the restaurant space specifically is sort of like natural language for me. I grew up in the hospitality space. Um, when I came out of school, I didn't quite know what I wanted to do. I was studying entrepreneurship and I didn't really know what, you know, like avenue that would take right out of school. And so I added marketing and got really interested in consumer preference, got really interested in branding and sort of what drives people to choose one brand over another. So I really went headfirst into marketing actually right out of school. And I remember going to the Career Center and just looking at agencies. And at the top of the list was a company called the Richards Group out of Dallas. And I was in Fort Worth going to TCU at the time. And so I just typically tend to sort of aim high. So I just called them and I said, "Hey, I'm interested in interning with your company." And I didn't have like really any context for what they did. I saw their work. I saw they were a branding agency more than just advertising, like strategy and a lot of brand planning and media buying and sort of integrated. They were the largest independent agency in the country at the time. And so I just went there and I connected through an older person that had been to TCU, a girl named Jen Taylor. And so sort of networked through that channel and was able to get an internship on the Home Depot account and sort of fell in love with that business and with that work and the people and just sort of this like really organic, culturally driven like beehive effect. And so I went to work there. I went to work at American Airlines for a summer internship and a couple other places to kind of get the other side of things, but the more corporate side. But I went to work there right out of school, ended up staying for 7 years. And from day one, I worked on restaurant pieces of business. So Wawa out of Philadelphia, sort of this like funky gas station with a legitimate food service deli built in, and then Chick-fil-A for the majority of the time I was there. And so that was a really important and I think pivotal. I was pivotal. I always say that was like my MBA is, I was there for so long and learned under so many great people. And when we started having kiddos, we moved back to Fort Worth intentionally, which is about 40 miles away. And so that sort of forced my hand to find something in Fort Worth. It was sort of a geographic decision. We wanted to be in Fort Worth. And so I had a friend who worked at Buxton since we graduated college. And he's like, there's a lot of connectivity. You're in client service, you're in account management, you like marketing, you like consumer preference and data and analytics. And so he brought me into Buxton. And I trained there for about 9 months under another TCU guy that I really liked, and then ended up spinning off and running their restaurant retail private equity group for the next 8 years.
Wait, can you pause for a second? Okay, so you did consulting for PE groups within Buxton. All right, I
Yeah.
understand. And that has a different dynamic than if you're an organic restaurant. You got money, then you actually have to build a number of locations. There's some
Yeah.
pressure there. Okay,
Yeah, my
got it.
my portfolio was probably 70% restaurant and retail, 30%, project-based, PE stuff would come across the desk, and it would be a 45-day, 30-day, sometimes 10-day, due diligence, white space. And so a PE
Okay.
firm would be interested in acquiring a company, or they'd be interested in rolling up 2 or 3 companies, and they'd wanna know what their market potential was. So we would take a swath of mobile data. We would take, sometimes they would have the target's data under an NDA. And so we would take some basic data, the location data, maybe location and sales, and we'd build sort of a down and dirty back of the napkin white space for them. So those were typically quick turn projects. And, we went through multiple cycles of like the DSO integration, veterinary care integration, mobile express car wash integration, like all those different, you know, industry like things that we saw over the last 10 years in terms of PE roll-ups. We were sort of in the center of all that. So those projects typically came from a relationship with a client that we worked on, more regularly. And so we'd have, quick turn projects like that come across.
So it wasn't doing necessarily real estate site selection for PE. It was like, is this a no-go on this deal? Okay,
Yeah, it was typically for evaluation of a potential target for
got it.
acquisition.
All
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, so, did that for 8 years, and then at the time, Hopdoddy was one of my clients, and so I remember when that deal came across the desk, Steven Plansky was our new sales guy at the time, and he signed this deal, and I grabbed it real quick. Most of the stuff in the restaurant space went to my team anyways, but that was one that I wanted for sure because growing up a Texas guy, Hopdoddy was a very cool brand to me. I'd gone to Austin a lot and really interested in their concept. Food was delicious, hospitality model was really good, and before I really knew anything about their business, I was just a fan of what they did. And so, I snatched that one up, and Jade Arkins, my junior, and I sort of ran it. We went to Austin immediately, met with Jeff Chandler, their CEO then and CEO now. Super good dude. Like, cannot say enough good things about Jeff. He gets it. He's a restaurant guy as well. His family grew up in that space. And so being a Pacific Northwest guy, kind of transplanted to Texas, we had a lot to talk about. And so we had a couple of good meetings. We built them. They weren't large enough at the time to have a predictive model, for top line forecasting sales. So we built them a benchmark model, and it was just really, I think, positioned appropriately. We leveraged good data that they had. It was sort of early. This was in 2017, maybe 2018. And so we built a white space for them, and then we started working really closely. They were one of our more like concierge clients. We had a lot of integration with them. We talked to them often. We talked about specific sites. And being from Texas, like we had a lot of local knowledge, and I had the benefit of being from DFW. So when they were
Mm-hmm.
talking about growth in Houston or Austin or DFW, like it was
You could
sort of
get your
easy
head
because
wrapped
it
around
was,
that.
yeah, areas that we grew up in. So we kind of forged that relationship, and eventually it's sort of, we had this conversation. Jeff paid me a super nice compliment. He was like, "I would love to be able to hire you one day." And I said, "That sounds great. Like, I love doing this consulting gig. I'm traveling like sometimes multiple times a week. I have small kids. I would love to go brand side eventually. One of my career aspirations is to be a brand president of a restaurant company. And so love the restaurant space, love the hospitality space. And Hopdoddy has always been a company that I've really admired, and especially under Jeff's leadership. So a couple of years went by and COVID happened, and I interviewed for their head of real estate job at the time. A lady named Helen Lau with ClearPath is kind of one of the savant recruiters in that space. And I looked her up, and I kept hearing this name Helen, and she was sort of this mythical figure. And she was sort of the guru in the space. So I looked her up, called her, and we had drinks in Dallas. And I was like, "Hey, here's where I am. Here's what I've done. Here's what I want to do." And she's been an advocate for me ever since. And so she, unbeknownst to me at the time, worked with Jeff and worked with a lot of kind of C-suite recruiting in that space and helped to kind of bridge the gap. So I interviewed for the job. I was down to like the final two, and I think I was the recommend, and the board and our financial sponsor, Catterton, sort of wanted them to hire a transactional person. And so they needed a deal person. And so, I had the strategy experience, I had the site selection and consulting experience, and I had
Is a
really good.
transactional person in this case like, okay, how do you do a roll up? Is that what we're talking about? What does that mean?
A transactional person is like someone who does real estate deals, like a negotiator, a deal
All
maker.
right, okay. Got it, got it, got it. And you've got all the strategy around where, what sites, what sequence. Okay, got it.
Yeah. Yeah, I had the strategy and the market planning background and just sort of the broad restaurant experience, coming from multiple sides of the business. But the piece of my resume that I was missing was, how do you actually go negotiate deals? How do you
Yep. All
actually
right.
get to the point where you sign leases? And so, Helen said, go work at Cane's or go work at any one of your restaurant clients and be a deal guy for a couple of years and sort of round out your resume. So I took that advice really seriously, and I left Buxton and I went to go work at CBRE. This was sort of on the tail end of the pandemic, like 21 to 23. And what that did is I was head of strategy on the UHG and Optum account. So it was healthcare consulting. I had a bunch of retail healthcare clients, but that got me close to the deal. And so I was working with a team of transaction managers, like you think of in your clients as probably director of real estate, so these are client or brand side real estate people. Like these are people that are negotiating our leases. And so at CBRE, I learned what critical dates were. I learned what portfolio management was. And so we were doing that. They were heavy in the M&A space. So I sort of set on both teams like strategy with Danny Gantz, one of my counterpart at the time, and set in on some M&A stuff. So, and they were cash heavy and rolling up lots of different companies. So that was fun to get to see. But most importantly, it got me closer to the actual transaction. It got me close to a group of TMs that were really savant negotiators and reorganizing leases and restructuring leases and doing dispositions where they were rolling up space. At the time, workplace optimization was a really important topic in that space. So like a lot of their offices, had hybrid workers and they had remote workers. So they were trying to optimize, non-dedicated spaces, right? Like workbenches. And you think like all the different, workplace settings for people who either have offices or maybe they have bench seating that come in 2 or 3 days a week. So we were working on a lot of that for them to try to optimize their real estate portfolio. And then on the clinical side, it was mostly, rolling up individual specialties into a multi-specialty clinic. So they would invest $20 million to build a new clinic, and we would take 7 different practices and roll them up, into one building. So it was really about being efficient and effective with space. And so that was good enough experience for me. It was close enough, deal making work to where the second time I interviewed for the job, I got it. And Jeff called me, he said, "We're firing up a real estate team. We want you to come and lead it. And we're back in growth mode, coming out of the pandemic." So it was sort of perfect timing. And I
Mhm.
called Helen. I was like, "I can't thank you enough for advocating for me and helping to like keep my name in the ring." So, and I just kept up the relationship with Jeff. I just said, "This is a job that I really want. This is an opportunity that I'm super excited about." And so when it came back up, I got it. And went to Austin, interviewed, and love the leadership team at Hopdoddy. It's all the same people I started working with 2 years ago. And so yeah, it's been a dream come true, and I've been super happy there so far.
That's amazing that you zeroed in with that conversation. It sounds like Helen Lau. And then you actually like, okay, I'm going to go do the thing, take the steps, and then you eventually got it. I feel like it's so rare in careers, like, okay, that's what I want to do. You did it, and then you got hired, which was awesome.
Yeah, yeah. I didn't totally want to go, start from scratch. Like what Helen had proposed was basically like taking a job that kiddos would take right out of college. Guys coming out with finance or real estate degrees, and I had 2 kids at the time, and I knew what that meant, sort of an earning standpoint. And so I was really trying to figure out how can I do that without taking that giant. How can I get that experience without taking that giant step, sort of backwards to get to the same net result. So, yeah, it was an intentional thing for sure.
So some of it sounds like, and my original question here is what is different and what is more important than you expected when you were at Buxton in the retail analysis piece? Some of it is the negotiation, but let's maybe stay on the retail analysis piece first, and then get into the actual transactional part of this. In the actual analysis, was Buxton a good viewpoint on like what really mattered when it comes to real estate strategy, or what did you learn going brand side that maybe consultants might not expect to be as important?
Yeah. I think so. I look back fondly on my days at Buxton. I learned so much at that company, mostly from the smart people across the aisle that were our modelers and our predictive analysts, just in terms of aggregating data and process and what they thought about. Coming in with sort of a strategy background, it was a really good and healthy conversation to bring together like the data science piece of it with the common sense side of it.
Mhm.
That's
Mhm.
that's something that we always like a healthy dynamic within Buxton. But yeah, for me, Buxton taught me about how to leverage data in a smart way. And, we were building huge models. I think the most complex model we built was for O'Reilly Auto Parts with 4,000 locations. And we were talking about orthogonal theorems and all this insane stuff. And it was way over my head intellectually from like a science standpoint. But one of the things that I would always think of is like, does this make sense? They
Yeah,
had
100%. Yeah,
does
yeah.
this right. So, we from a forecasting accuracy standpoint, we were close to like 10%, plus or minus accuracy in like a 5-year look back for O'Reilly's. Like that was a very, very accurate model. And when you have that much data and the box is that simple and operations is I guess minimized, the restaurant space is hugely important and hugely impactful. And somewhere like O'Reilly's, it's sort of less important, just in that retail space. But it's a different equation, right? It's a different equation than a restaurant company that's hospitality driven, where the GM management team like hugely impacts the performance of that location, and
You
then
don't have
bringing
nearly as many locations.
fewer locations. Yeah, with like 30 or 40 locations, it's you don't have a statistically valid sample set to be forecasting revenue. If someone tells you you do, then they're that's a questionable thing. But it was really just it was learning all of that. It was learning all of like how to apply data science in a way that can actually be impactful and insightful within your business. What matters and what doesn't? Are we doing the right things at the right time? Because I think it's a trajectory, right? Companies that are just starting out or have 5 locations, like there's room for data science. There's room for analytics to help you optimize and grow your business. It's a lot more gut feeling at that point. And as you get more locations and more data, you can lean a little bit more heavily on data science and on analytics. And so, O'Reilly's would sign off on sites that forecasted well above their threshold with not a ton of other consideration. The deal side mattered, but if we were forecasting a site to do X, whatever it would almost always do that. I mean, it was a
Mm.
rare outlier in those models where it wouldn't, but you take like a Jersey Mike's or something that, albeit 1,500 locations at the time, they were still considering all the other important elements, parking, visibility, ingress, egress, signage, like all the softer side of things. I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit more later, but yeah, I think for me, Buxton really taught me about the 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 practical application of data and how you bring that into the conversation.
What about when you moved over to Hopdoddy? What did you learn in that period that was a bit of an aha for you?
I think the biggest thing probably was the shift towards like financial thinking, the overall pro forma of a site.
Okay.
Really, at Buxton, we had what we considered a broad view of like customers, transactions, sales, location data.
Yeah. You don't get the cost as much.
Yeah. You're not really thinking about your prime cost. You're not really thinking about occupancy costs. And so transitioning over to the brand side and sort of looking at how they selected sites and how they really got deals approved, like coming in from the market planning side, I can strategize all day long. We can put together a plan all day long. But when you're actually doing deals and you have a lease and you know what your occupancy costs are, you know what your CAM charges are, your, TI, like once you piece all that together and you have your prime cost, your food, your labor, occupancy, and you put all that together, the store level EBITDA and the cash on cash returns, CapEx costs. We talk a lot about build costs and how expensive restaurants are to build. Like there's more considerations. You think of throughput, you think of box size. We modeled box size for some clients at Buxton, but I didn't think a ton about it, and it's a really important question that retailers are asking is like, am I going to get more out of this 5,000 square foot restaurant than I am a 3,500 square foot restaurant? What does that do to the bottom
Okay.
line? Right. So
Yep.
on the brand side, we think a lot more about that. And we're actually like optimizing our box to be a little bit smaller. And so profitability
Okay.
is great and throughput's great. So that's probably the site specific and sort of cost structure specific things has probably been the biggest change in viewpoint being on the brand side. Working with a really good financial team to help bring all that together is probably been the biggest difference.
You know, that is ringing a bell for me. And I've been doing just a lot of analysis using our credit card data on the brands that have really broken out in retail. And some of the insights that I've got are super boring. Like I was looking at Chili's and their big turnaround. I think his name's Kevin Hochman over there. First thing he does is cut the menu 25%, reduce complexity, and then focus purely on profitability. Then he takes the money from that, puts it into like 160 million. I might be wrong on that number, more in labor spend than what they were spending. But it was like the sequence of events and like they did have the viral TikTok stuff that went on, but they were ready for it. And like it's just I think, and I just recently analyzed Hobby Lobby as well, which is very different. They're not trying to be small, they got those big box locations, but they buy them in second generation real estate. It's usually a little bit cheaper, and
Mhm.
they took a ton of market share when Joanne went out, just because they have a lot of space and they're like they have a lot of financial rigor.
Yeah.
And that's been my big insight, I would say, in the past 2 months is some of the financial rigor. I was thinking about this before, talking. Um, I was thinking about the formats that you prefer when I was looking at Hopdoddy, and I've never been to a Hopdoddy because I don't spend a lot of time in Texas. But my understanding is you don't have a lot of out parcel locations. Sometimes it's inline and you like to get kind of on that corner. But
Yeah.
when you think about choosing a location, do you have a preference on like a brand new lifestyle center and like the costs associated with that? Or would you rather go into a second generation if it fits your profile? How do you think of that?
That's a great question and something that we talk about often. So part of answering that is probably like important to understand Hopdoddy's genesis. So we our first location was founded um, in 2010 on South Congress. And South Congress is sort of this gentrified part of Austin. It used to be very dilapidated. It was sort of run down in the 70s and 80s, and then had sort of this gentrification. There was this hotelier, Liz Lambert, who planted this flag on South Congress with this cool hotel called Hotel San Jose. And since then, and really over the last even 10 years, South Congress has totally blown up, maybe the last 15 or 20 years. So it's completely changed, but it was a pretty urban environment. There's a lot of foot traffic, there's a lot of conference activity, there's a lot of
Okay.
people that go out on South Congress. We're sort of for tourism as a major tourism component. There's some like cool bars and eateries and music halls on South Congress. And then over the last 10 years, there's a Soho House there. There's an Equinox. There's just huge Class A retail blowing up all around us. And so, that was a very urban site for us to start. And over the last 10 years, and we've seen this in the data, we have seen our profile sort of evolve. The young, like, sort of movers and shakers, the hipsters that used to eat at Austin Hopdoddy, over the last 15 years have sort of grown up. And so when those people grow up and it's people in sort of our demographic, our age group, they move out to the suburbs and they have kiddos. And so we have that conversation around the evolution of this brand. When you were talking about Chili's, like their ability to reinvigorate themselves based on their brand life cycle is something that's really, really important for brands to do. And something that I think a lot of brands struggle with, and that's why they ultimately flop, is finding this point of relevancy again. Chili's has been around so long. I remember like one of Chili's first locations in Dallas, like my dad took me to it when I was a kid. And so I've sort of grown up with Chili's as well. And, their ability to like find that hook and become relevant again is super important. At Hopdoddy, we're trying to avoid that fall off through menu innovation, focus on our guest experience, like those key value drivers, and then really just growing, right? Like we talk a lot about how, great brands grow or they risk, stabilization and sort of withering on the vine. So as Hopdoddy has grown, we have, Jeff used to say to me, like, find me the next SoCo. And I would look at him and I would say, SoCo is such a unique trade area. It's such a unique beast. Like, we can find the SoCo in every market, but if you really are going to grow this concept, you have to be comfortable with different formats. You have to be comfortable going into some suburban settings, and you can still present to the guest the exact same food and hospitality and vibe that Hopdoddy is known for, but you can't duplicate just magically this thing that we have at South Congress in every other trade area. And so it's continued to be one of our top performing restaurants, but we've sort of grown into this suburban strategy where we'll go into like the most recent restaurant we opened was in McKinney, which is a North Dallas suburb, and it's a Whole Foods anchored center. It's Class A
Okay.
retail. There's a La La Land coffee. There's a Hudson House. There's Chewy's coming. There's, it's relevant in sort of high growth restaurant and retail. And so it's where we want to be when we're in that setting. But you have, you're serving a sort of different type of guest. You're serving affluent families. There are kids that come into our restaurant. We don't have like a dedicated kids program. We have a kids menu, but we don't really have like play spaces or like, Hat Creek is really geared towards families. They have play spaces and they have very intentional like focus on that, sort of family dynamic. We still want to be a place where like mom and dad can come on a date night and have a couple margaritas and sit on the patio and have a good date night, listen to good music, whatever. And so as we grow into those suburban trade areas, we have to also be accommodating of families. And so we have that conversation a lot around how do we do that in a way that's both, being true to the brand and also serving the guests in which we choose to operate. And so that's been a really healthy conversation for us over the last couple of years as we've had more of those suburban type locations.
From what I noticed in looking at your portfolio against our segmentation is it's still you're near a lot of young professionals still near. But when I look at who's spending, the majority is actually coming from you mentioned probably our segment would be suburb chic is what we call it, but it's a higher income millennial suburban type segment. Not like we're talking about the top 1% of wealth, but they have kids anywhere from 3 to 12 usually is the ranges. So it's interesting to see the differences in what it made me think is those people are also going back to the locations closer to the city. They might not live there. They might not
Mhm.
live like super near there, but they're actually going there and spending money, maybe because they were there before.
Yeah. Yeah, we talked a lot about, the difference between where people live and where people work. Something that's been interesting in our business is off premise. And, we have one location in South Austin off William Cannon, which we call Little Dottie. It's a
Little Dottie, yeah, it's real small format, yeah.
yeah, it was intended to be that it sort of strategically rolled downhill a little bit, and so guests would see it as like a normal Hopdoddy, but it was our foray into like, sort of a quicker serve, mostly like off premise. And so it's we did a couple different like test things there, but today guests would see it as like a normal Hopdoddy. But the one key differentiator is it has a mobile order pickup window. And through COVID, it just took off. And even today, we do 30 to 40% of our sales from that location through the mobile order pickup window. So it's caused us to really, again, like meeting your guests where they are versus like being stewards of the brand. We love facilitating that in-restaurant experience. We think Hop Dotty is a place where you want to go and like sidle up to the bar and have a few drinks, have dinner, enjoy the music, enjoy the ambiance, enjoy the hospitality. And so we have this conversation around losing that when you go off prem. And also hamburgers, like as a consumer, unless I'm eating a QSR hamburger, which is like for me, Whataburger, like in the car on the go, I want to eat a hamburger hot and fresh. Like, sitting down at the counter, like all my local spots, I want to go like eat there. And so I didn't really think that burgers traveled well, but we've seen this proliferation of off-prem where our guests are clearly telling us, yes, we love Hop Dotty, and yes, we love it enough to risk third-party delivery like coldness or, not that freshest experience, that sometimes happens. And we still have really great reviews even off-prem, whether it's grab and go from Hop Dotty or third-party delivery. Like it's just been an increasingly important part of our business that we've been trying to optimize. We're actually testing mobile order pickup windows in a few more of our suburban locations going forward, just to see if we've kind of found this lightning in a bottle where, we need to meet guests where they are. People are showing, and I'm sure I want to hear your thoughts on this in a minute, but how much of the restaurant space has continued post COVID to be off prem? Because we were surprised by that, but certainly want to be opportunistic about it.
Yeah. Um, I've got a few thoughts on that. I've been so surprised at the success at Dutch Bros. I think one of their secrets is they're not going for the typical Starbucks higher income consumer, though there's a lot more young professional and working class people, but they're still spending almost a similar ticket size, but for a um, smaller parcel. So Starbucks average ticket size is like 67 cents and Dutch Bros is like $13.23, which is a significantly lower income consumer if you look across all of them. And they're proving you can do it with a smaller parcel in a pickup window. And I'm wondering if you're about to discover a similar situation. Okay, when it comes to off-prem, what we can see from our data is if someone's ordering it from like Postmates or Grubhub, like we see that come through the credit card transaction. Here's what's been a little bit surprising to me about Gen Z. Millennials on the retail side, what I've seen about Gen Z is they over index in a similar way to Gen X in actually physically visiting the retail
Hmm.
clothes. And the millennials are more likely to just order it.
Yeah.
And then I've not seen quite the same thing with mobile ordering in restaurants. It seems like they're doing a lot. Gen Z is doing a lot of online ordering. So far, I need to go check the data, similar to how you would expect a millennial to do it.
Mhm.
That it's weird to me that they're the same in their physical retail choices as they are their restaurant choices. So that's what I've seen so far. One of the things that you were talking about, and I wanted to ask you about this because I saw in your conversation with GL, you were talking about co-tenancy and competition. So
Mhm.
you said a word, and I might be reading a little bit into it, but you said we want to see the right mix of affluence, the right mix of competition, and the right mix of co-tenancy. And I'm maybe the second too, when you're talking about mix, are you actually looking at a mix of competition, and is that a positive signal? Is there specific types of co-tenants? Like there's not just like one co-tenant that you're looking for? Help me understand that word mix.
Yeah, I think this is probably one of the most important things that we talk, you and me collectively, us talk about in our space is from a data science standpoint, it's really hard to figure that out. It's really hard to model, you know, competition, which also acts as co-tenants, right? So we try really intentionally to bring, the art and science together there to make good decisions. But what I mean when I say mix is it's not a linear equation. For us, it's a fun, unique problem to have. So we talk a lot about share of wallet or the restaurant space share of stomach. When you're going into a center, we want to have the old restaurant row, right? We want to have a destination where there are other traffic drivers. So whether that's retail, whether that's services, whether it's other restaurants, we're a little bit competitive agnostic in just that we are a handcrafted burger joint. There's not a lot of other direct competitors in our space, but we also have to be, honest with ourselves and say, okay, if there's not seven other burger concepts like us, when consumers are making decisions about where to eat, what else is in the mix? What else is in that conversation set? And so for us, the competition is the same thing as co-tenancy. And we're working through that with Calibrate right now to figure out sort of what that mix is. Because to me, it's a point of saturation, right? You have so many people within a trade area, divide that by, that's the numerator, and you divide that by the denominator, which is other comparable trade-off restaurants, thinking about something to eat. And so you have a lot of considerations in that. I think about how my family makes decisions on where we go eat. Sometimes there's a veto vote where someone's being super healthy, and so if we don't have something healthy on the menu, we get vetoed out based on that. We do, thank goodness. Or somebody's really craving a hamburger, and so that drives a big piece of the conversation. Or somebody really wants tacos, and so they end up at Velvet. So when we talk about competition and co-tenancy, it's kind of a double-edged sword because so the mix for us is about having the right number of other complementary brands in that trade area without being oversaturated on the restaurant side. So if we're going into a trade area where there's a Torchy's, that's a good thing for us. If we're going into a trade area or a center that has Velvet Taco, that's a good thing for us. And I think for me, that's more so about like clustering of demographics. We have some trade areas where, and this is sort of also the conversation between number of people versus number of core customers, number of people that match your profile, having the right types of people in the right trade areas, both from a residential and then from a daytime standpoint, using cell phone data or like workplace data, for lunch versus dinner, we talk a lot about day part mix. And so for me, it's having enough retail draw to where the center will be busy and we can attract a lot of the right types of people to the center without having every other player that we compete against, because at that point, then you're competing for the same amount of dollars. So I don't know that I don't it's not linear, it's a mix, right? So
Yeah.
like to your question, when I say mix, I think of like a healthy balance, and when we have a center that has six other competitors, if they have it's sort of a splintering effect for us from a competition standpoint. Like if there's Waterburgers and there might be a Jake's Hamburgers or there might be, Velvet Taco Torchy. If there's all those other players, we may decide that it's too competitively saturated. But in general, when we're going into a center, we want at least one or two of those guys present because they're going to bring a lot of other like-minded people that we compete well for.
Yeah, it's the ratio that you were just talking about, the numerator of basically people, or if you want to get more refined, your target people, target customer segments, and then the denominator would be, how much competitors are there. And as I'm thinking about that, I'm thinking about the total trade area size and the amount of people that live there. But I mean, wouldn't it be a better metric to use the estimated foot traffic? Right, because not all the people that live there are going to go there. So you're am I right to say you're pretty much using the foot traffic there as
Yeah.
the numerator?
Yeah, the harder things for us to quantify, sort of like the college population. We know we have some trade areas like San Marcos, Texas, that's very heavily geared towards a
Yeah.
specific college, right? And there's a higher percentage of college kiddos that come into our restaurant there. College Station is another example. Different parts of Austin have different, mixes of UT students versus like core population, but college students are always a little bit hard to tackle in the credit card data. They sometimes still have mom and dad's credit card, and so it's disproportionately tagged to like the A's and the B's and the C's, because it's based on their. So that's a challenge, right, to figure out. But yeah, use it. Yes,
You know this. This is good. There's another nuance in there. It is helpful for tagging an individual person if they have some home ownership and college students don't. And so it's not only do you have the credit card, is the credit card is correctly associated to a person.
totally.
And so you have to do some reweighting because you do undercount people that are renters essentially.
Yeah, and like dorms and fraternity sorority houses are non-permanent residences, and
Got it.
so kids living there are real people with real disposable income, but they're not in some of those data sets. So yeah, to your point, like cracking the mobile data and really understanding traffic is super important. It's a conversation that we have with Calibrate, and we were sort of just getting into, when I left at Buxton is like, one, is this good data? Is this statistically valid sample set? Is it helpful to really make strategic decisions based off of? Is it broad enough? And do we have confidence in the data? So I think it's probably grown, like it's not language that I live and speak every day, all day, like you do. The proliferation of that data and sort of the evolution of that data over the last couple of years is something that we rely on Calibrate to sort of inform. But yeah, we probably lean more so into the mobile data side of things for lunch and daytime, also like where businesses are located. And then you have the whole, on and off prem and sort of remote and flex situation, which makes that a little bit muddy. You have like in the NAICS code, you have a manufacturing company that has 120 people there. And, how do you programmatically figure out, okay, it's manufacturing. So probably 110 of those people are in office every day because they're doing physical work versus, a bank or a consultancy that may have tons of salespeople on the road or tons of people that are remote, flex, hybrid, they may have 30% of their population in office at any time. That's
Do you
challenging.
often think about that? Do you?
I do. I think about it a lot. Yeah,
Okay.
I think it's a lot because like in New York, all the banks went back years ago. And so you look at JP Morgan, you look at any of the big banks in New York, and 100% of their people are back in office 5 days a week
Okay. So
prescriptively.
you know
So
you're going to get a lunch crowd from them.
yeah, you can rely on that data. If you're looking at a NAICS code that says, JP Morgan's here and they have 600 employees, that that base is there, in different parts of the country, you still have a lot of flex, remote, and hybrid work situations. So, I'm at home during the day. If I'm not in Austin or traveling looking at sites, I'm at home. So, you know, I think again, cell phone data is the honest answer for where I am physically during the day, right?
I see.
So, to me, like you rely less on NAICS because companies have such a wide array of a return to work policy. It makes it sort of challenging.
Yeah, if lunch is a big part, I can see where that's really important. We're starting to get into your relationship with Calibrate, so I want to look into that because you're going to have such a good perspective coming from Buxton and then working with Calibrate. So, you mentioned in that JLL interview that you're partnering with Calibrate in today's market. How much of it is this science type decision versus gut feel?
Mhm. Gosh, great question. I think probably the intersection of the two is where good deals happen, where smart site selection decisions are made. I think, at least for us procedurally, we have a lot of confidence in our model. With 50 locations, we have a pretty healthy sample set. We're in the low to mid 40s in sample. So, you know, when I look at what Calibrate's done for us in terms, we do have a top line revenue forecasting model. It's the year one forecast, and then we get a year three forecast, which is our full point of stabilization. And so, when we build pro formas, we do take that into consideration. We're not lazy to the point where we take that number and plug it in. There's a lot of other considerations like, how many restaurants do we have in market, performance of those restaurants recently in market, the occupancy, like so many other things that go into the pro forma. Is labor expensive in that market? Is real estate expensive in that market? So we're building in all those considerations, but we we do rely on that calibrate forecast to tell us directionally. One, is this, a go or no go decision? If it's forecasting below $2 million, we would have to have some really, really good rationale for why we think that site is going to do exceedingly well. Our AUVs are, in the high twos, low threes. So if we get a site that scores 3.8 million, then, that's generally one that we are interested in. That's one that we're going to go take a deeper dive at. Georgetown, Texas is one that we're looking at right now, and it forecasts really well for all the right reasons. There's a ton of the right types of people there, good retail mix, et cetera, et cetera. And so we're trying to find the right box there. So we use it directionally. I would say that's probably 60 to 70% of the consideration. And then we have a white
Okay.
space, which helps us identify like infill trade areas to go look, and that really helps our brokers be more efficient and effective in bringing us the right deals. Like it's not
That
following.
word you just used, infill trade areas, I don't know if I understand what that means.
Oh yeah, so when we run a white space analysis, we can run it one of two ways. We can either run it like pure white space, like let's say if we had no locations in Texas, just optimize my portfolio and tell me where rank stack the highest to lowest trade area, and geospatially lay that out. If you, what's more realistic for most brands is this acknowledgement that I do have an existing portfolio and I'm likely not going to close all of those restaurants. And so we infill just takes into consideration your existing restaurants and
Got
then
it, got it, got it.
spaces
Okay.
around them. Yeah.
We are filling in a DMA that already has spots.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. And in that scenario, we can say, we have one underperformer that we're seeking to relocate. And so when they run that analysis, they can run it without consideration for that one specific restaurant and say, okay, if this restaurant didn't exist, would we pick a different part of this trade area, or would we pick this trade area at all? And so that's sort of the like handcrafted approach that, Calibrate is good at for running those different scenarios. But yeah, for the most part, we run our analysis with consideration for our existing restaurants. So we call that infill. And so when we do that, we take that to be about 70% of the equation, and then the other 30% is stuff that we talk a lot about with JLL. Signage. I think signage is a little bit less important. Like signage for us is sort of table stakes, but given the way people work with cell phone data and just like finding things on their phone, I think signage is a little bit less important for us. At least we look at visibility. Like if I'm going to be, in a hard corner, or I'm going to be at an end cap, I want to be at a prominent part of that center where people see us and we have a high, awareness. Like we have branded Hopdoddy signage that goes on our building, and we push our landlords to have really prominent like retail signage on two or three sides of our building. That's really important for us. Signage, I think people just don't pay as much attention to. So visibility of the restaurant is really important for us. Ingress, egress is really important for us. And then parking is a major thing that we talk about with every single deal. So, that intersection of art and science, like that 30 to 40%, parking is a huge piece of that because, there's areas where people are attuned to parking in the parking garage. And then there's areas that we look at now where people just don't think that way and they are parking garage averse. And then you have all the different setups with, metered park. Is it paid parking? Is it validated parking? Is it gated? Is it ungated? Are there security issues? Are there, is it safe? Is it accessible? Like, so those are things that like, in the consulting days, we wouldn't really think of as much. I would hear my clients talk about those things, and we knew it was important. Coming over to the brand side, like to your question earlier, that's something that we intimately discuss at length. And we have killed deals just because the parking isn't good, or there's minimum parking ratios that most developers put into place. And if we're in an area where our guests are going to have a hard time, parking and getting to us, we know we're going to be busy. And so we don't want to lose guests because parking is bad. So, we look at where the handicap spots are. We look at the ability to have a mobile order pickup window. We look at, is it garage parking versus surface parking? And so, it's a big piece of our consideration. We have moved forward and we have put to rest deals that, didn't have good parking.
Yeah, I was talking in a few other podcasts, one about grocery, where it was like the golden primary site for a retailer, but everything was perfect. Everything, but they just could not get people did not deal with the frustration of getting there. And then I was actually talking with Calibrate on the same podcast about what's a site that should not have performed as well as it did and was incredible. And Brian Strickland said, I went and visited a site trying to figure out why it was doing so well. And there was a train that got off right there, and it was just so convenient. It's a convenience factor, and that sometimes that's just a death knell in it. Hey, you were talking about the way that you were working with the broker, and I want to make sure that we hit that. What is your process? So it sounds like you're working with Calibrate. You get these sort of general areas, and you're focusing on them. How much is it that where you like focus them on an area versus they're coming to you with a deal and then you're looking at it and considering it? What proportion does it look like?
Yeah, so, we work with the JLL team, pretty exclusively. We use NewQuest out of Houston, which I have a good relationship with
Hey,
those
yeah, I
guys.
know those guys.
Yeah, yeah, Brett's a really good dude, and Alex, they're great. But Austin and Barry out of Austin, through JLL handle just about everything else for us. Just sort of like set that stage. But yeah, when we sat down with them, Austin likes to tell me real estate matters, and it does. So we go through a process where, we work with Calibrate, we establish our white space, and then we sort of establish the broad strategy for the brand. So our brand strategy is called Texas Plus, and it's predicated on this idea that we do about $700,000 better from an AUV standpoint in Texas compared to non-Texas stores. The brand is just means something here. It's organic to Austin. It has this Texas brand halo effect, and so we can open things in Texas, and they naturally, for the most part, knock on wood, do really really well. We do have locations outside of Texas that do exceedingly well also. Like Nashville is one of our top performing locations. It does over $4 million. We just like bullseye on that location a few years before my time. And it's sort of a mixed bag beyond that. So, our California locations, from a cost standpoint, they do fine from an AUV standpoint, but from the cost structure standpoint, just aren't as profitable. Denver sort of goes the same way. And then we do well in Phoenix and we do well in Memphis, we do well in Nashville, and then our Florida location does fine. So, we Texas Plus is really this idea that we are going to maximize Texas. We have a lot of runway in front of us. Texas is a huge state, great to do business, reasonable real estate cost, reasonable labor costs. And so we want to maximize Texas, but then there's also a consideration to continue to need to show growth beyond Texas. And so, Texas Plus is just that. It's maximizing our major DMAs in Texas where we're underpenetrated and still every DMA. Austin's sort of getting there, but in Houston, we have a bunch more opportunity for growth. DFW, we have a ton of opportunity for growth. We're way understored in DFW. And then, San Antonio probably has one or two more. And then beyond that, it's like, well, where else do we want to focus? I see Hopdoddy growing in sort of an SEC footprint trajectory. I love the graduate hotels. I think of like, we do really well in college towns. We do really well, in music scene places. And so we want to go into those markets. I think there's some really key markets. We talk about Nashville and Atlanta being the keys to the East to sort of unlock the East. And I think eventually we'll grow up through the Midwest. But I see us growing like to the point of DC, like just from a trajectory standpoint. And then sort of growing up through the Carolinas, growing into Florida, like there's lots of good opportunity there. I think things are a little more challenging out west just from a cost standpoint. I do think we'll continue to grow in Phoenix. We have two stores there. Phoenix is a high growth market and where we're putting some focus. We'll likely have a couple more deals in Phoenix coming up, but Denver DMA like goes the same way as California from a labor law standpoint. And so it's hard. It's hard to do business there. And so we are strategically not focusing on the left side of the country for those exact reasons. We won't need to make a fair profit. We need to grow our people. There's, a lot of reasons why, but we're sort of strategically focused on that Texas Plus strategy, for those reasons.
Yeah. This is awesome, man. I think that it's so valuable to have this conversation because in my world, I work with all the calibrates and I work with a lot of individual retailers. And it's really helpful to have someone who's actually worked on both sides. There's a few of you out there, there's not a lot to really kind of bridge that gap on what matters. Because even if the end result, when you're working at an analytics type company, is all I got to do is give a forecast and then I'm done, it
Mhm.
still really helps to have a full understanding of that other side. And it's awesome hearing about your strategy with Hopdoddy. If people wanted to learn more about the work that you do or learn more about Hopdoddy, what would they do?
Yeah, just shoot me an email. Happy to connect with anybody. I get hit up by, kiddos coming out of college and people that want to go into real estate, people that want to go into site selection or consulting. And so I'm more than happy to pay it forward. I had a ton of great mentors, that sort of got me to this point. I'm sort of midpoint of my career. So yeah, I'm more than happy to share knowledge or, places where I've tripped and fell along the way, with anybody who has questions.
Right on. Thank you, Ryan.
Yeah. Thanks, Lyden. Good talking to you.